It was a Tuesday night around 9:40. I remember because the microwave clock was blinking again and I still hadn't fixed it. I was standing in the kitchen, phone in my hand, not really hungry, not really energized either, just tired in that specific weekday way where your brain feels like it's been dimmed a notch. I opened a delivery app without thinking about it. Didn't scroll much. Picked something familiar. Added a drink I didn't need. There was a $7 fee in there somewhere, plus tip, plus tax. By the time I hit confirm, it was almost $40. What struck me later wasn't the food. It was how little the decision felt like a decision. I didn't weigh anything. I didn't argue with myself. Money just moved. I told myself I'd balance it out later, which is something I say a lot when I don't actually have a plan. Standing there waiting for the microwave to beep, I realized this wasn't an exception. This was how a lot of my spending started. Quietly, automatically, without me really showing up for it. I started noticing how often my life came with preloaded plans. A group text about dinner popped up on a Thursday afternoon. Someone had already picked the place. Someone else had already made the reservation. All that was left was my yes. And I said it. I almost always did. Dinner turned into drinks. Drinks turned into a rideshare home. The total was around $80. Not outrageous. Just enough to disappear without leaving a mark. Then I looked at my statements one night and counted how many of those nights there were. For that month, sometimes 5. Suddenly, that easygoing yes was costing me $300 or $400 without ever feeling like spending. That part was uncomfortable. I didn't remember agreeing to that number. I remembered not wanting to be awkward. I remembered not wanting to slow things down. I never asked what my money wanted to do that night. I just let the plan happen and figured I'd deal with it later. Later kept showing up with receipts. Once I started paying attention, subscriptions were the easiest place to look. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were quiet. Little charges scattered through the month. $12, $15, $9.99. Things I'd signed up for during moments when I wanted things to feel smoother or calmer or more put together. At first they felt responsible, like I was building a system for myself. Then one Sunday afternoon I finally added them all up. 27 recurring charges, just over $300 a month. That number sat there longer than I expected. It wasn't panic. It was more like realizing you've been carrying something heavy for so long, you forgot it was optional. I told myself I needed all of them, or that canceling was a hassle, or that I'd review them eventually. Eventually never came. They didn't need my attention to survive. They just needed my silence. And silence, it turns out, is expensive. Delivery fees started blending together after a while. $5 here, $8 there, sometimes more, sometimes less. I didn't think of them as spending. I thought of them as the cost of being tired. I'd say it saved time, saved energy, saved me from one more decision at the end of the day. Then one month I filtered my statement just for fees, not food, just fees. It came out to about $160. That one landed weird, because I couldn't remember what any of those fees felt like in the moment. I remembered the relief of not cooking. I didn't remember the money moving. Over a year, that relief cost me close to $2,000. That's when it hit me that I wasn't paying for convenience. I was paying to avoid planning. Every time I told myself I'd figure it out tomorrow, tomorrow sent me a bill. Trips used to feel intentional. Something you planned around, saved for, looked forward to. Somewhere along the way, they started happening to me. Someone shared a flight deal. Someone else booked first. Suddenly, I was matching their dates, their budget, their pace. One weekend trip ended up costing me about $1,200 all in. Flights, hotel, food, Ubers, the might as well moments. I didn't regret the trip exactly, but the aftertaste lasted longer than the memories. The charge showed up on my card weeks after the picture stopped getting likes. I remember telling myself experiences were worth it, and they are. But I never paused to ask if this one was worth this version of my bank account. I didn't choose the trip. I stepped into it mid-motion. That's what made it feel heavier afterward. Most of my unplanned spending happened when I was exhausted, not sad, not reckless, just done for the day. Someone suggested drinks after work, and I said yes before my brain caught up. 2 beers turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a rideshare. $65 vanished on a Tuesday. Do that once a week, and it's over $3,000 a year. That math didn't feel good because it wasn't about partying or losing control. It was about how tired I was when the decision got made. I used to call it a reward for working hard. Looking back, it feels more like surrender. I let exhaustion decide because I didn't have the energy to decide myself. That realization sat quietly for a while. I didn't want to look at it at first, but it explained a lot. Family plans hit differently. Holidays, weddings, obligations that aren't really optional. Flights get booked fast. Hotels get chosen based on someone else's comfort level. You Venmo without thinking too much about it because questioning it feels like questioning the relationship. One wedding weekend ran me about $900 when everything was done. I never felt irresponsible about it. I felt loyal. But when I zoomed out over a few years, those moments stacked up into real money. Money I never planned for because it didn't feel like a choice. I told myself this was just part of life. And maybe it is, but that sentence carries a price tag. Not huge all at once, just steady. And steady adds up. I always thought financial plans were about big goals, retirement, emergency funds, that kind of thing. But most of my money wasn't leaking there. It was leaking in between. Coffee because I was already out. Lunch because packing felt annoying. $22 a day, 5 days a week. Over a year, that's about $5,700. Seeing that number didn't make me angry. It made me tired because none of those moments felt like spending. They felt like momentum. I wasn't choosing against anything. I was just going along. The problem wasn't the coffee. It was how often my money moved without ever checking in with me. I wasn't reckless. I was absent. And absence turns out to be surprisingly expensive. Sometimes the plans that cost me the most came from someone else being better at deciding. A salesperson, a partner, a company that made the process feel smooth. I switched phone plans once because it sounded easier. New phone, new contract, higher monthly bill, $92 instead of $60. Over 2 years, that's nearly $800 extra. I didn't feel tricked. I felt relieved. That's what bothered me. I paid more to avoid friction. I told myself the difference was small. It always is when you look at it month by month. It's only when you stretch the timeline out that it starts to feel real. Letting someone else decide felt peaceful at first. Later, it felt like I'd paid for quiet. Annual expenses were the hardest to feel. Credit card fees, software renewals, memberships I barely remembered signing up for. They only showed up once a year, so they never triggered alarm bells. One afternoon, I listed them all out. Just over $1,100. What surprised me wasn't the amount. It was how none of them had been reviewed. They just renewed themselves, year after year, without asking if they still belonged. I told myself this was adulthood. Bills, responsibilities. But adulthood doesn't have to mean autopilot. The discomfort came from realizing how long I'd been letting that idea slide. Deals were another trap. Not bad deals, reasonable ones. A flight that dropped $40, a limited time offer. I booked quickly, feeling smart about it. Then I spent $300 reshuffling everything else to make it work. Hotel changes, transportation, food plans. At the time, it felt efficient. In hindsight, it felt rushed. I confused motion with strategy. I thought saving on one line item meant the plan made sense. I didn't step back to see the full picture. The money didn't disappear because I was careless. It disappeared because I acted fast without asking where I was actually going. Tickets bought months in advance always felt harmless. Concerts, events, small trips, $45 here, $70 there. By the time the date arrived, the money was long gone and the expense felt like a surprise. One month I realized I'd already committed nearly half of my next paycheck before it even arrived. Not on necessities. On plans future me had agreed to without asking present me. I used to say I'd figure it out later. Later always came faster than expected. That phrase stopped sounding confident and started sounding tired. I liked thinking of myself as flexible, easygoing, go with the flow. But flow has a direction, and I wasn't choosing it. One spontaneous road trip cost me about $430. Do that a few times a year and it's real money. The uncomfortable part wasn't the trip. It was realizing flexibility without anchors is just drift. I didn't want to admit that because I liked that version of myself. But liking something doesn't make it free. Seeing that trade-off clearly changed how it felt to look back. Some spending happened because stopping felt awkward, splitting checks evenly when costs weren't even, covering small differences to keep things smooth. $10 here, $20 there. Over time, it added up to hundreds. This one was harder to sit with because it meant I was paying to avoid brief discomfort. I told myself it wasn't worth making a thing out of it. Zoomed out, I'd made a lot of money decisions to avoid a few seconds of awkwardness. The math on that wasn't great. I spent a long time confusing optimism with planning, assuming next month would be better, that I'd catch up. Meanwhile, I was committing future dollars I didn't have yet. One month I realized I'd pre-spent about 40% of my next paycheck. Living slightly ahead of my money felt normal. That normal came with a constant low-grade stress I couldn't quite name. It wasn't panic, it was a hum. A background noise that followed me everywhere. Once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. Once a plan started, I rarely stopped it, even when it stopped making sense. A gym membership I hated cost me $59 a month for 2 years. That's over $1,400. I stayed because quitting felt like admitting something. I told myself consistency mattered. Looking back, I wasn't paying for fitness. I was paying to preserve a story about myself. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt honest. Routine was comfortable. Same lunch spot, same habits, same spending. $14 a day didn't feel like much. Over a year, it was over $3,500. The sadness wasn't about the food. It was about how routine hid accumulation. I didn't need to optimize everything. I just needed to notice. Noticing felt boring. That's probably why I avoided it for so long. Avoidance had a cost too. Not switching insurance, not negotiating rent, not reviewing bills. One bill I hadn't checked in years was $38 higher than it needed to be. That's $456 a year. It felt like a laziness tax. Not because I didn't care, but because I kept telling myself I'd handle it later. Later was expensive. When I finally added up just the it's finding expenses, the number surprised me. Over $9,000 a year. Not on anything dramatic, just drift. What stayed with me wasn't shame. It was grief. For how much attention I'd given away. I used to think planning was about control. Now it felt more like presence. Just being there when money moved. I was sitting on the couch late one night. Bank app open. No panic, no emergency. Just numbers I finally recognized. Plans will always happen. Life doesn't wait. The cost wasn't just money, it was awareness. Noticing didn't fix anything right away, it just made things heavier and more honest. I stayed there longer than usual, phone in my hand, letting that weight settle instead of pushing it away.